righty, now we're going to go back to our regularly scheduled calendar as it appears. Our first bill today is House Bill 801 by Representative Griffey. Representative Griffey, you have the floor. Do we have a motion and a second? We got a motion and a second. You're in proper posture, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I respectfully request a roll call vote on this legislation, please. Mr. Chairman, this is E-Verify. We already have E-Verify in Tennessee for employers of 50 and more. What this would do would require all employers and subcontractors of folks that do contracting with the state of Tennessee and other entities to use E-Verify. I know there's opposition to this, and there has been. And I submit that it comes down to the argument it's going to cost our employers additional time, money, and resources to have to comply with this. And I submit that those arguments really just don't carry the day because for 50 and more employees, the employers are already doing that. If it's less than 50 employees, it would cost any employer $159 per year to do 50 more employees. That works out to $3 per employee. Using E-Verify also protects the employer because it gives you a safe harbor provision that there's a presumption that you haven't engaged in any illegal conduct if you use E-Verify program. You can actually use E-Verify, and it doesn't cost the employer anything to use it. You can just sign up with the federal government. You do have to kind of familiarize yourself with the computer interface, but it's really not that difficult. You don't have to read all 800 pages. I know some people have proposed and keep up with all the announcements. The best thing to do, and I know a number of employers who have more than 25 employees that need to verify this, that's the best, simplest thing to do. Just contact your vendor. If you don't have internet access, you can call up these third-party companies, vendors, and they'll do the work for you. Employers already have to maintain all the records and documentation for I-9. In America, in Tennessee, the way we have a problem with illegal immigration and illegal workers working underneath the radar and against the system. So how do they do that? They do that because if an employer has a Social Security number, some kind of identification that generally complies with the I-9, they're okay. What happens is the employees or illegal workers are getting fraudulent documentation and providing that to the employer. That generally gives the employer some coverage. If we required all employers to use E-Verify, that would be a huge deterrent for people to try to work under the system and under the radar. And it's not fair to employers that comply with E-Verify for employers that don't comply and hire people that probably may be illegal or they're kind of turning a blind eye. I think it's time that we protect Tennessee workers, people who are here legally, people who have gone through the process to get verified, and so that everybody's on the same playing field. And I submit that to the committee's consideration. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Do we have any questions? Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And sponsor, I appreciate your bill. We dealt with this a couple of years ago in the committee, and I understand what you're trying to do, and I'm in full agreement. I think that illegal immigration and people that are flying under the radar, it's a real problem. The concern I have, there was a great deal of logic and that was put into coming up with the number 50 as being the threshold. And there is a big difference between an employer that has over 50 or 100 or any size of the workforce. There's a tremendous difference between a company like that probably has an HR department and someone that has 7 or 8 employees. That's a mom and pop operation. And so this is a big jump. I think a couple of years ago when I supported your bill, we changed it to something like 25 or 30. And so I think this is getting into small business too much. And I mean, as we all know, small business is the backbone of the Tennessee economy. And I think this is too much of a burden on them. I mean, I don't know why you chose the threshold of 6 rather than 25.
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason it's 6 is defined in federal law as a quote employer for federal employment purposes. And so what this bill does is it simply says all employers. And so employers means folks that have 6 or more. If you have less than 6, it's not going to apply to you. So you would not have to use every. So it's not absolutely every single employer. And particularly if you get down to folks who have less than 6 employees, it would not apply to them. But and we tried to do 25 last year, and the Senate had to go home for their COVID vacation, so they didn't get a chance to pick it up. But I submit that this General Assembly should stand up and say, look, it's not fair for some employers to have to comply to this, and some employers to get away with turning a blind eye and being able to skirt the system and use illegal labor here. It's abusive for the illegal labor, for one thing, because they don't have the opportunity to challenge work conditions, pay. They could get screwed over on their pay, and the employer can go, what are you going to do? You're going to raise a stink, or I'll call immigration on you or something. So this system, somebody needs to stand up and take a step, and I'm hoping this committee and this General Assembly will do just that.
Thank you, sir. Representative Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got some real concerns about this bill, and I'm against it in many levels. But I think that the biggest thing is we can all agree here, I hope, that this country at the federal level really needs to solve our immigration issues, and we need to come up with comprehensive immigration reform. But coming off a pandemic, so many of our small businesses have been impacted. In particular, I've got a lot of businesses in my district that have a lot of legal immigrants that they employ. And so I've heard from them, I've heard from many different advocacy groups that represent small business that have a real problem with this and feel like it's going to be extremely burdensome to businesses, especially coming off a pandemic. So I just don't think we need to put business should not be responsible for, at the end of the day, enforcing a broken immigration system that exists because the federal government can't solve this problem. So I understand where you're coming from, what you're saying you're trying to do, but I just think this is the wrong way to go about it, and it hurts business, and it's bad public policy.
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for your comments. And at some point, somebody's got to do something. We've all seen the newscast. We see the number of illegal folks.
Excuse me. We do not allow props in our committee, Representative Griffey.
And my apologies to the chair and the committee. I didn't know if we wouldn't allow to distribute props or anything. Or
No,
this is something
use of props in any way.
Very well.
It is just you and your brilliant oratory to carry the day, sir.
Uh-oh, we're in trouble then. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, we've all seen the newscast of the just parades of thousands of folks that are going to come into and flood the United States due to, I think, the Democrat President Biden's immigration policies. That's going to be disastrous. These folks are going to have to either get on welfare or get some kind of job. And look, I think everybody should have to obey the same kind of laws that we're all required to obey. It ought to be a fair system. I used to be a Democrat years and years and years ago. And you know why? Because I was from West Tennessee, and I was for the little guy, the working man, the farmer. And I'm still for those same two categories more than anybody else, because I think those two categories of folks have the least voice in government today. And that's what I'm advocating for. And if we have a fair system that everybody has to comply with, regardless of your place or whatever, just obey the law that we all agree and we pass. What's wrong with enforcing that? Submit to the committee on that.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. And with regards to that, I have a little bit of a retort to that, and that's the fact that this seems like I'm a Memphis State basketball fan on this. And we always, back in the day, we used to say, well, the NCAA is mad at North Carolina, so they're going to put Memphis State on probation. And in this case, I see that I see and share your frustration with regards to illegal immigration. I do. That is, and I agree with Representative Powell's statement that we need comprehensive federal changes all across the board with regard to immigration. But this body, in and of ourselves, we don't control that. We don't even have a southern border to defend that we're as far as having enforcement actions there. And so what it seems as if is this bill takes those frustrations out about federal policy and federal immigration and transfers that ire to the backs of Tennessee small business holders. Because in and of itself, the E-Verify situation, that's great. It's not a cure-all, but I understand that. But when I start looking at the enforcement and the risk that business owners are being put with this legislation, I struggle with that. And I'm not ready to deputize the small businesses, and I don't think they want to be deputized, especially not from whatever I've heard from my community and my businesses, to deputize them to basically serve as immigration enforcement arm. And so I applaud your efforts, and I'm as frustrated as the next guy. But I also do get a little bit concerned when somebody comes forward and says, and a business owner presents a case to me and says, this is going to cost me more money. And then somebody here stands in the well and says, well, it's not that much. They don't know I've got another bill that I'm looking at too, that when somebody from one line of work starts telling another business that they know that it's not going to cost very much and they don't know their business, I tend to kind of retract a little bit. So I'm struggling with this piece of legislation, but I just wanted to know you to know where I was coming from. It has much more to do with putting this on the backs of small businesses whenever what is needed is comprehensive federal reform. And I will stand up and holler for that all day long. Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments and sentiments to try to address this issue one way or another. The cost arguments are simply a fallacy, in my opinion. You can do E-Verify for free if you want to. Yes, you're going to have to get online with the E-Verify system, look at it. Might take you 3 or 4 hours. That's all it took me when I used the E-Verify system in the federal system. I went with a third-party contractor, which is what most people do. It's $150 a year for 50 employees. That's $3 per employee. That's all the costs we're talking about. If you want to pay it, if you want to do it for free, you can do it for free. And the arguments that it's that complicated, I simply are not meritorious. I was able to do it in 3 or 4 hours. And I submit most business owners, I'd submit almost all business owners, if you're smart enough to run a business, you're smart enough to operate the E-Verify system without too many problems in one afternoon.
And again, the E-Verify portion is not what I struggle with in this bill. But you know what, though? The great thing about this place here and all in America is reasonable people can reasonably disagree.
Agreed.
And so next up, we have Representative Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The thing about the I-9 is the employee and the employer both complete the I-9, and it's really just stuck in a file. It's never verified that that employee's Social Security number, name, date of birth actually match what is in the Social Security system. And honestly, I've used E-Verify. It's really easy. The only problem is there's so many regulations on small business. It's really hard to keep up. It's really, really hard to keep up, and you have to hire more people. So like Representative Boyd, I'd like to see this maybe at 25 rather than at the low number that you picked. The thing about the E-Verify system too is it doesn't tell you if someone is an illegal alien. What it tells you, does the Social Security number, the date of birth, and the name all match? And there's lots of reasons why that might not ever match, but it instantly tells you, and that's really good. Maybe someone made a mistake writing down their information. Maybe someone's lying for a reason. And so if you are someone who doesn't have a Social Security number, and maybe you're guessing, and you're trying to skirt the system here, yeah, it will definitely identify those people. And the thing about illegal immigration is we don't have doctors and lawyers breaking into this country to work here. We have very poor and unskilled people breaking into this country to work here. And who illegal immigration hurts is the poor in this country who have to then compete for jobs with these people who are coming across the border illegally. And that is sad. That is a very sad thing. And so, you know, there is the system of E-Verify. I do have sympathy for the employers because as a company controller, man, are we busy. Oh my gosh, we are so busy. And, you know, I do have a payroll company, and they take care of that for us, and we pay them handsomely to do that. And thank God they do, because we have so much to do every day that I can't even imagine if I had to sit down at the computer and do E-Verify. It doesn't really take that long. It's one more thing in the day to do, to get to. So I agree with Representative Boyd. I would probably like to see it at 25, and it is free. It's absolutely free. You can check it for free. You don't have to use a system or a service. We have a news payroll company. They do that for us, and I'm glad for it because it is a bit of a pain. So I guess I don't really have a question. I have a comment, and my comment is that you know, illegal immigration hurts the poorest people in our society. It makes it harder for them to get a job, and that just breaks your heart. And you know, we try to help those folks every day, and you hate to see them having to compete for jobs when, you know, things are so tough right now. So thank you.
One moment, Mr. Sponsor. We're going to get to Representative or Leader Camper, and you save that retort for once Leader Camper's done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sponsor, it's interesting that President Biden's not even been in 50 days, I think, maybe 50, and it's his fault. It's crazy to me. Anyway, but you know, I'm glad he's there because he's probably going to fix the problem. Let's be optimistic about that. So, it's his problem. It's his fault in 50 days, and maybe in 50 more days we'll give him credit for fixing the problem. I agree with the chairman that this is a federal issue, and it is a federal, our federal legislators and the executive branch really need to come up with reform that both sides can agree in a bipartisan way to fix the problems that we're dealing with immigration in this country. And my colleague to the left of me just talked about who's impacted the most by it, and I don't necessarily disagree that that group of people are. But let's not blame people here. Let's try to fix the problem. Let's put the problem where it actually sits at the federal level, and let's allow them to do their job. And let's try to help them do it. Maybe, you know, we can have a delegation, you know, to go to Washington and say in a bipartisan way, we want to help fix immigration. Would you be willing to join me in that, Mr. Sponsor?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Lee. You know I have the utmost respect for you and your positions. And yes, we definitely need to fix our immigration issue. My concern is that if we continue to have a official government policy that we're going to allow folks that show up at the border to come into this United States, whether they have a legal status or claim to do so or not, we are exacerbating the problem rather than solving the problem. And until we get the problem solved at the border, we're going to just continue to throw gasoline on the fire and make matters worse.
So let's
for
go
the
try
folks
to
at
do
the very
that.
bottom of the wage scale, the folks who've gone through the system, who've done the right things, who abide by the law. And it's folks at the very bottom that suffer the most. So, but I would agree, I'm more than willing to go to D.C. and advocate for, you know, let's fix the system and let's stop illegally coming into the United States without the proper authorization. And as Congress passed the law that says everyone should abide by.
Thank you.
And we're gonna be working towards landing this plane, Leader, but one
All
more.
right, we're gonna land a plane, yes.
We're into
okay.
some deep weeds here, so let's get back to our bill in front of us.
Exactly, and this bill is not gonna solve that problem. And that's the point that I'm making. This bill is not gonna solve that problem. It is gonna be burdensome on small businesses, and that's, we all say we support them. Let's really support them, not only in our words, but in our deeds. If this is gonna put some burdens, as my colleague said, they outsource theirs because it's burdensome. Those were her words. So yeah, it may be simple, it may be easy, but it still take a person to actually do it, which is a cost to a business. And as my colleague to the right of me said, with COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've been through, these businesses are suffering right now just to make payroll. So yeah, let's join, just you and I, let's join together. Let's put together a bipartisan team to go with solutions of how we can solve it at the federal level and not put unnecessary burdens on our local businesses here to try to solve a problem that is not theirs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. We're gonna go over here to Representative Haston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question, and if you don't have this now, even no matter what happens today in committee, you can get it to me an answer later. But if a small business wasn't able to comply either by accident or on purpose, what kind of penalty do we know that they might be looking at if they did hire someone incorrectly or inaccurately?
Mr. Sponsor, and if not, we have legal and our analysts, we've looked at the comparison between existing law and what this law does, but to the bill sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your comments on that. There is a presumption that if you use E-Verify, you have not violated employment provisions. I would have to defer to legal with the specific penalties regarding this bill or current federal legislation.
And with that, if we could have some legal counsel. Excuse me, we're going to have to go out of session so that this brilliant legal mind can share thoughts.
Thank you, Chairman. Jamie Shanks, Office of Legal Services. Under the current law, how it is that the employer can either, for those under 50 but having between 6 and 50, they can either get certain information and maintain it on file, or they can do E-Verify. And if they choose to do E-Verify, then they have more protections if there's a challenge to them as having employed an illegal alien under another part of the code. And of course, this bill is now changing that everyone would then be doing E-Verify, so then they would have that protection.
Excuse me, before we go back in session, what does it do from a punitive standpoint to change the penalties from where they are today to what's contemplated by this bill?
This bill is adding that the requirement does apply to in instances of some subcontractors, contractors of that sort, and there is an increase in penalties for violations. But to get the specific ones, I'd have to look through, but there is an increase.
Thank you, Jamie. We're going back into session, and it's that part of the bill which is the one that gives me heartburn. Mr. Sponsor, I owe you a comment, and if you could wrap us up here, because I think we're headed in a direction.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my understanding there is additional penalty for not complying with E-Verify, but as far as increased penalties for not complying with federal employment law, I didn't ask for any increased penalties regarding what's already under existing federal and state employment law. So, and Leader Camper, you and I respect your opinion highly. We can agree to disagree. I think if you want to deter people from violating the law, the thing to do is set up a system that discourages cheating the system. And by using E-Verify, it's a huge deterrent to people that are here illegally to simply, they know they have a much better chance of using a fake Social Security number or other identification, and the employer doesn't use E-Verify because those papers are going to sit in the file system, and unless they're audited, the employer is not going to face any potential liability. If the employer uses E-Verify, the employer has security. I've got a good, and it is instantaneous. You use a third-party vendor, you submit your I-9 documentation to them, they give you instant thing, here's your number, here's your paper, put it in your file, you're good to go. People that use E-Verify, people that are here illegally trying to game the system, are not going to want to go to somebody that uses E-Verify because of the risk of being exposed. So I submit that to you.
Thank you, sir. We've got a, before we, are we having objections to a question on the bill? I see an objection. I've got objections to. All righty, here we go. Representative Brickens.
Representative Griffey, I certainly appreciate everything in the general approach to this bill and where you're going. But overall, especially dropping it down to 6 is where I get the biggest heartburn. I think we've already had the discussion, and I can rehash it. Before we just call a vote up or down on this bill, would you consider this bill going to a summer study and so it can stay alive?
Mr. Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the second year I've brought this bill. I think I brought it both terms in the one under 11th. I don't think a summer study is going to benefit. We're either going to do this or not. So I just submit it to committee's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Not seeing any more questions, we are going to call the question. The bill sponsor has indeed requested a roll call vote. We will accommodate those wishes. So, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Boyd? No. Bricken? No. Camper? No. Haston? No. Lynn? No. Powell? No. Chairman Vaughn?
No.
Mr. Chairman, you have 6 noes, 1 present not voting.
And with that, the bill fails. Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, for the encouraging dialogue.